Thanks everyone for tuning in to check out our podcast today, Maker Connect. My name is Matt Despins, and I'll be your host for the show. With me today, we have Andy Paul. That's right, I didn't make a mistake. Andy Paul. Andy is an author, podcaster, speaker, CEO, and also is one of the biggest sales influencers on LinkedIn. These include his website, andypaul.com, his book, Sell Without Selling Out, and his own podcast, The Win Rate. He has his own podcast too, so I'm completely going to be judged here. We're definitely looking forward to having you on the show, Andy. And to be honest, I'm actually humbled and grateful to have you here. So to get us started, I just said a little bit about you. I'd love to hear in your own words anything that you want to explain about yourself or your career. You've done a lot, but as much as you want to talk about before we dive in. So I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm not sure.
Yes, sir.
A lot to add is, after long period of time, primarily working startups within the tech space and growing companies. Started my own company back, 23 years ago now, which was focused on this idea of like, how does small companies compete against big companies and win really big deals? And that had been my area of expertise as VP of sales for a number of startups. I thought, well, geez, I know how to do this. And we've grown these companies and we've sold them and taken them public, and all on the backs of learning how to sell big deals against big companies and as small no-name companies. And so start my company, help other companies learn how to do that, learn how to go compete, small companies. And I've done that for a while. And then, probably, 2012, I published my first book. So now I have 3 books, and started my podcast in 2015, which was acquired back in 2020. And we did, I worked on that till just earlier this year, where I decided to start a new podcast. But that one we did 1,200 episodes and so on.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was, as you and I were talking about, it was big for the sales space, tiny compared to Joe Rogan or a Smartless podcast or something like that. But nonetheless. And so started this new podcast called the Win Rate Podcast. And we're just focusing purely on sales effectiveness, the buyer experience, and improving win rates. And it's also a little different format because it's instead of an interview format, it's which I did 1,200 episodes of interviews, but it's a group discussion, roundtable discussion. So me and 3 guests, bringing lots of different people with different types of experience and expertise to the discussion, and hopefully just provide great content for people listening.
Imagine being the host to our listeners with a gentleman who has 1,200 podcasts underneath his belt, 3 books, and 25 years of sales expertise. No pressure on your host here, so we'll just see how we do.
Actually, it's I told you a birthday coming up. This is actually my 47th year in sales.
47th
Think
year
about that.
in sales. Wow.
And it's, I've been fortunate to witness every major revolution in the selling profession in the last, however many years. And, you see all these things have been labeled as transformational technologies as people are touting AI today, which clearly it's going to be important. But things just tend to get sort of wrapped in, right? I mean, when I started selling, there was no voicemail, there was no email, there was no internet, there was
Glenn Ross.
Well, not really, but a
little bit different.
Things are changing. People were, one of the big innovations the year before I started in sales was FedEx, right? So that started transforming things because suddenly, we could deliver proposals more quickly. And then voice, think about this, voicemail. I mean, that started because, sellers today always complain about, like, you can never get anybody on the phone. It's like, you have everybody's freaking number. I mean, when I was starting selling, there was a receptionist. Everybody had a receptionist. And then the receptionist would transfer the call to a secretary. They were called secretaries then, but to an admin,
Yep.
You never got through to anybody. I mean, it was way worse than it is today. So, I mean, everything's relative.
You could find everybody's contact info too in the yellow pages, right? You can mail them.
The company. But the thing is, one of the big innovations that helped transform sales was, a term no one uses anymore, but it's called direct inward dialing. is where PBXs, digital switches that are on premise for companies that enable you to dial somebody right to their desk. That didn't exist when we got started. Many of us got started. So that was a huge innovation and transformation. So I've seen and experienced it all, and worked with companies at every stage throughout these transformations. And the thing that's been in the commonality throughout the whole thing, and I stress the people, I stress it in my book, it always boils down to the person. Right? It's how I communicate with you. It's how I connect with you, how I build trust with you, how I understand the things that are most important to you. That helps me win. That is the thing that guides whether you're going to win a deal. It's the technology is just maybe put you in a position to have those conversations, and they're important, and you want to use them. But it's what you do when you actually have that conversation that makes the difference. And that hasn't changed in decades.
So, what an amazing call out. So, here we are in 2023, where, like you said, the big focus and talk is on AI and automation. But here we have somebody who has seen it all the way through, and still today, sitting here on August 10th, 2023, you still believe, I do too, we're in alignment on this, that it's about the quality of the empathy, humanity in the moment that you show that person you're with. Show them that you are invested in them, that you care. Is that right?
Yes. So, I don't know how many times we have to see the data on this. And the data, there's plenty of data on this that shows that buyers' decision, this is increasingly the case, not lesser the case. Buyers' purchase decisions, they're actually the decisions. This is two things that sellers get wrong. One is we're in an era where in almost every product category that exists, certainly in the tech space, but even outside the tech space, we've seen this explosion in number of vendors. And so in the mind of your buyer, your product is pretty much indistinguishable from all the other products that they're considering buying.
Me too.
Right. So this idea that product makes a difference, well, your product, having a competitive product at a competitive price is table stakes. So if you take that as a given, and again, the data is pretty clear about that, is then on what basis are people making their decision? And what are they deciding? Well, again, Gartner and others have done research on this. In the most recent Gartner report that came out this spring, is what buyers are doing is they're choosing vendors. They're not buying product. Because if the products are all basically the same in their mind, then what they're doing is they're choosing a company to work with, right? Who's the company I feel comfortable with, that I trust to be able to help us achieve these goals we want to achieve? Well, who's the embodiment of that company? It's you, the salesperson. So again, your win rate, as I talk about my show, and I write about, that is the buyer's vote on the quality and the value of that experience they had with you as they navigate through this process of making their choice of vendor. How are you able to help them make progress toward making that decision? That's what differentiates you. So your ability to do that is predicated on your ability to form this human connection with somebody, right? That opens the door to be able to build your credibility and trust. And then when you have that trust, well, as you know from selling, is trust opens the door to be able to get a little deeper with the questions you ask, right? And to earn the right to get the answers, right? Maybe they'll share information with you that they just don't share it with everybody. And with that additional information, then you reach a level of understanding about what's really important to the buyer. Once you got that, you have an inside track as a seller. But all start with your ability to connect with somebody as a human.
I couldn't agree with that anymore, and I'm not sure that Andy knew this. We talked a couple of months ago, but I don't know if I shared or. So my background is I'm a mental health therapist and a police officer. So a mental health therapist, police officer, and sales more recently in the last 5 years. So I can attest to, and not that Andy needs any confirmation, but I mean that's where humanity is at. You need to dive into not just like the depths of people, like this isn't some mind game, but this is actually, like Andy's calling out, letting them know, not making them believe, but letting them know that you care about them. You care about what's important to them. You care about what they need. that you're going to do what you say you're going to do and that you genuinely have their best interests at heart. And so I love that. Andy, it's one thing to hear that from somebody who's 5 years in the industry and, just trying to make a name for themselves. It's a whole other hear that from somebody who has lived it, breathed it, and done it. So if I'm understanding you right, aside from the humanity of it, you're saying that even statistically, your best sales outcomes come when you're the most human. Is that
absolutely.
right?
Yeah. So I started referencing the most recent Gartner report, or well, they put out lots of reports. So one that came out this spring.
There's lots of
one
reports.
that came out this spring. But there's this chart that made its way around the online, and the chart from the report was, basically, what are the 9 most important factors that influence a buyer's choice of vendor? Number 1. Well, and I like to show this list to sales teams. I've shown it several occasions when I've given presentations since it came out. And I'll say, okay, what's missing from this list? You get the silence. And then finally says, it doesn't mention product. What else is missing? Price. Yeah, product and price are not among the 9 most important factors influencing a choice of a vendor. Because again, there's assumption that, they all pretty much do what we need to have them do. So then the difference is, who do we want to work with, right? Who we feel comfortable with working with? Who's going to help us achieve our goals? It comes down to the individual, right? So number 1 factor influencing selection of vendor is trustworthiness. I mean, what else do you need to hear as a seller? That drives everything. So can you get a deal in the absence of trust? I asked this on LinkedIn this week. I posted actually my weekly newsletter, Win Rate Wednesdays, I call it. If people want to go to my website and sign up. Little plug, sorry.
Win Rate Wednesdays, got it.
50,000 people get it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's what I'm talking about. Can you win a deal in the absence of trust? Well, sure, it's possible, but it's highly improbable, right? I mean, that's the thing. It's possible, but highly, highly unlikely. And this is what buyers are saying, look, everything else are the same. This becomes the tiebreaker. So it's, this human element always been, over the years, we started talking about my excessively long career, is it's always been the tiebreaker. And for me, as a non-technical person who spent virtually my entire career in technology sales or technology related sales, very complex technology sales, selling satellite communication systems. I knew the product, I knew the technology as a layperson, not an engineer. So how did I win deals? How did I enable companies to invest? I sold 1 9-figure deal in my career, but a 9-figure deal. There's trust, not just in me, but in the entire organization. But it started with me and the rest of the organization as well. Trust. I mean, you serve a pick-em for the customer in terms of which products that we're going to choose. It was the personal difference. They said, we trust these guys to be able to execute.
And that cuts so many ways. That works on so many levels, because not only do you get the chance to have some moments of genuine humanity, which I would argue seem to be lacking sometimes in today's world, but you also are making statistically relevant decisions. You're doing something that is statistically more likely to net you the deal that you want anyway. And let's also not forget that establishing that relationship sets you up with that person anyway for any negotiation you may need to do. So go ahead, Andy. But I mean, the reality of it is, like,
I was laughing or smiling at this. You're talking about, statistically, it's because, as a seller, I like to say, as a seller, you choose to win. And people say, well, what do you mean I choose to win? So, well, you choose through your actions and decisions you make about the actions you're going to take. You are choosing to win. And one of the ways to sort of think about that is every time you have the opportunity to interact with the buyer, ask yourself, is this increasing the probability of me winning the deal? Well, what do I have to do to increase the probability? Well, what I have to do is, because what the buyer is looking for and I wrote about this in Sell Without Selling Out, is we use this term value so loosely in sales, right? Value this, value this. So I sum it up for people. What value really means in the eye of the buyer is progress, right? Did you help me make progress towards making my decision? And so if you are able to help them through, video call or voice, phone call or voice message or whatever, through them investing their time, consuming something from you, help them make progress toward making a decision that had value. Well, you've increased your odds of winning the deal because you're adding to your sort of tally of, every time we interact with Matt, this was worth our time and attention. We got something out of it that helped us make progress. So as sellers, you have to be very deliberate and intentional every time you take an action. This is why, rail about sort of robotic selling and overly mechanized selling. No, we're dealing with humans, and we have to think about what the impact of our actions have on those humans and the things they're trying to accomplish. It doesn't take long. It takes a couple seconds to think about it. Am I helping? Right? Am I helping? This is sort of a frame I want people to think about in sales is, are you helping or are you selling? Right? If you're helping, then you're increasing your probabilities of ultimately winning the deal because you're helping the buyer make progress toward making this decision. And this decision that you really want to think about they're making is the decision to make a change in their business, not a decision to buy your product. You're helping them choose to make a change and who they want to make that change with.
I know what I've seen in my short career, but I want to hear from your experience. If you had two sellers, one of whom, let's say, had a level 10 product knowledge, but a level 5 likability, or the reverse, a level 10 likability, but only a level 5 product knowledge, who have you seen win those deals most of the time?
That's actually really hard, right? Because I don't know if I'd use the word likability, right? I mean, I think likability is important, but certainly, again, people who are not likable, I've seen people like that succeed in sales, right? I mean, there's always the other case, right? The exception. I think being likable is, to me, like, well, why wouldn't you be? Because it's free and it costs you nothing and it's under your control. So other things being equal, why wouldn't you be, right? But is it absolutely essential? Yeah, not necessarily. So it really, in that case, it really depends on how the people use it, right? I mean, because people can have a lot of product knowledge, but not what I've seen is a lot of product knowledge, but not be able to synthesize what they're hearing from the buyer into sort of a unique solution or a solution that really aligns with what the buyer is trying to achieve by making this investment in this new product or service. And so they can have all the knowledge, but if they can't really take it and sort of pivot and say, okay, what they're really saying based on the questions I've asked and what they're really telling me is, that's slightly different than this. Sometimes people with all the product knowledge get a little rigid. On the other hand, I've worked with people, CEOs, founders, incredible engineers who obviously had all the product knowledge in the world, but were such great synthesizers, right, of things they heard from the buyer. To me, that's such a incredible skill for sellers to have. And it's a combination of curiosity, asking the questions, not being afraid to ask questions you don't know the answers to, and then being a little innovative and open-minded when you hear the answers, and then saying, well, let me make sure I really understand where you're heading with this. And if we could do this, then how would that, and what would the impact be for you? Is, following your curiosity, really explore that at a deeper level, and then drive to a level of understanding of the buyer. And I've seen people, both types that you've described, sort of be able to achieve that. Part of it, I think, and maybe another capability that, or it's, I wouldn't call it skill, but just capability, is just open-mindedness and ability to synthesize. And I think this is one of the things that's continues to differentiate humans from AI, is the ability to see the unique thread, the spark of creativity and innovation, synthesize into something new. Yeah, if you can do that, that'll always set you apart.
It's a lot of, like you said, a lot of curiosity too. Curious about the other person, because I think what I'm hearing you say is that if you're talking about creating a moment of intimacy,
Oh,
right?
yeah.
You're talking about if I'm really listening to you, Andy, about what you're really saying, and then I can synthesize that information into a question that lets you know that I'm really with you. Like we're vibing together. Like I argue, I know how that makes me
Yeah.
feel when somebody does that to me. That's a very like it could be something simple. I could be shopping for I don't know a microwave at the appliance store, and if he says, "Oh, I know what you mean by this," I go, "Yeah."
And this is such a critical point you bring up. I'm so glad you raise it. And again, I think this is something that will continue to set humans apart from the machines for certainly as far as I can foresee. Everybody thinks that their life experience and their lived experience is unique to them. And what we tend to do in sales is generalize. Well, this is my ICP. This is the persona I'm talking to. And we know that if we ask these types of questions to these personas, I'm going to get this answer. But we never really get down to what's beneath that, right? To how they feel. And there's been studies on this in the medical field and so on, people using AI-based decision assist systems. And what they found is sort of ultimate complaint is not that they're saying bad advice in general, but at some point the patients using it were saying, it just doesn't understand me, right? I may have the same disease that 100,000 other people have, but no one feels that pain the way I feel that pain. No one feels the discomfort the way I feel the discomfort. And as sellers, our buyers are doing the same thing, right? We train sellers to go into a customer and say, oh, wow, yeah, we've worked with dozens of companies just like yours to solve this problem. And what the customer is saying is, well, yeah, I'm in the same industry as those companies, but we've got a different way of doing business. We have a different way of looking at our business. We look at our pain points differently than everybody else because they're ours. So when you come in and make that blanket statement, you're just like everybody else, they start turning you off, right? Because, oh yeah, they don't understand me. And they're not gonna make the effort to really understand me. And that starts degrading trust. Whereas if you make the effort, the point you're making is use your curiosity to dig deeper, use your empathy. And this is a point that I write about, and it's so important for sellers to understand. I think you really appreciate this probably more than anybody mental health professional, is that we tell sellers, look, you need to have empathy for the buyer. Put yourself in their shoes. Well, I'm here to tell you that does nothing for you or for them, right? Because it gives you no information to be able to help them. And that's in general what we call compassionate empathy, right? What the buyer needs is what we call cognitive empathy. It's not that I understand how you feel. I need to understand why you feel the way you do. And if I understand why you feel the way you do, then I have information to be able to help you, right? And to fix your pain points. But we tend to give up at, oh yeah, I get it. I really understand. Yeah, that's got to feel bad. So what? I mean, it's great to be human and empathize with them, right? But you're not doing them any good unless you take it a step further with your curiosity and say, well, I need to really find out why they feel this way. But when I ask my scripted discovery questions, I'm never going to get there. So I go in with, and yeah, people confuse asking scripted questions with being curious. It's the opposite of being curious. You're closed off. You're not really interested in what's unique about them and discovering really what's important to them.
Well, and I think too, the other thing that like you called out earlier is that how can you make any progress with somebody if you're not fully understanding what their unique pain is? And I think it's one thing, like you pointed out, to just say, "No, I'm really sorry, it must be tough," right? But like to really do that in a cognitive way is a whole different process.
Yes.
Even in the world of mental health, you have talk therapy where you lay on a couch and you talk and you get it out. Okay. Freudian therapy is what they call it. But then you have cognitive behavioral therapy where you're taking actions to make progress. And so what Andy's touching on here, which is perfect, is that getting with that buyer to the point where of intimacy, where they understand that you are partnering with them in that pain and that you're here to make progress with some kind of solution. Is that generally right, Andy?
Yeah. And that we are human. We are really making an effort to understand, right? So another common thing we do, and again, you probably appreciate this from a mental health perspective,
Yeah.
is as sellers, and humans, we do this, right? We ask a question of somebody and they say, oh yeah, let's say theoretically, yeah, how was your vacation? Oh, it was horrible. We show up at a hotel, they didn't have our reservations. Okay. What you hear all the time from sellers is, oh yeah, that sucks. I had that happen to me too. And so what you've done is that's called a shift response. You've shifted the attention away from the buyer onto yourself. And people just do it routinely. The opposite of that is what they call a support response. Is, oh, that had been horrible. So we're able to find rooms in the hotel. We're able to, how'd your vacation go?
There you go.
So think of that as a sales perspective, right? And I hear this played out all the time when you listen to recorded calls or just listen in on conversations that people have. It's just, I said, it's not a sales defect per se. It's a human thing. But I talked before about, what are the things we're doing that could increase the probability, or being really intentional in how we interact with people. That is one way. I want to make sure that I keep the focus on you as the buyer, because I want to understand what's really important to you. And as soon as I shift the focus on the me, conversation is going to go sideways.
Well, I think people too, and I want the AI part, I'm fascinated to hear some of your thoughts on, but as we go towards that direction, I think, and maybe this is the mental health therapist in me and the law enforcement, the very personalized kind of person, but I think that we're craving genuine human interaction more than ever as a species. And to your point, that example, I showed up at the hotel, they didn't have my room. Everybody's used to hearing somebody say, oh man, that's terrible. But so what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Or guess what happened to me? And you're like, I mean, listen, we're all adults here, but when you're reaching out to somebody with a pain point, there's a little bit of reach out there. Okay, maybe in this moment, maybe a little humanity support, right? Big difference to your point, Andy, to say, it sucks. Hey, did you watch the game this weekend? Versus what you said, oh man, well, did they have a room for you? Were you able to stay there? How was your vacation? So I love your call out there. And, I want to hear your thoughts on this. I wrote a post on LinkedIn about a week ago about how as AI is coming in, it may force us to be more human.
Oh, absolutely.
Because it may get to, right, it gets to the point where people are craving it, but also you may not know, you may get to the point where you don't know if you're talking to a real human. So it may be companies adopt, we only finalize deals with a handshake. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, I recommend a book for people to read who are listening to this. If you want, I think one of the great perspectives on this is a book called Humans Are Underrated, and written just a few years ago by Jeff Colvin, who had written a book called Talent is Overrated. But he's an editor at Fortune and a great journalist, and did his research, and his conclusion was, which I completely agree, which was that the critical skill for success in the 21st century in an AI world is going to be the ability to become more intensely human.
I want him on the podcast. I love him already.
Well, you read the book. It's a great book.
Yeah.
And I agree 100%, because if you think about it, is the more that the buyer experience is interacting with large language model informed generative AI driven experiences, I think they all pretty much are going to look alike, because they're all largely training on the same information, right? And that's going to lack, machines lack empathy. Machines have no lived experience, right? Machines don't have the ability to synthesize and the creative spark that humans do. that enable you to interact in a certain way and provide insights to buyers. And so I agree 100%. As I think what will happen, inevitably, we're going to see more and more of the buying experience of interacting with, some sort of automated, mechanized platform driven by AI. But the buyer's going to have the same issue as, well, how do I make my choice? Why? I don't necessarily, who am I building trust with? Your website, your AI? This may be fine if I'm just buying, something on Amazon. I've got trust in the vendor and a retail name. There's some brand promise there, but hey, I'm making a big decision here that's going to have impact on me and the company and the lives and careers of others. Yeah. Why do buyers want to talk to, or not want to talk to, why do buyers need to talk to sellers today? The rationale is really no different. It's, they want to make sure to validate certain things. They want somebody to ask them questions they don't know to ask themselves. They want someone to provide an insight that perhaps is relevant to them that they didn't know about themselves. Yeah. See, I'm one of these people who think that, yes, you hear the data, 75% of buyers don't want to talk to sellers. And my take on that is, well, that's completely wrong. 100% of buyers don't want to talk to sellers, but they know they need to. And the problem is, and the frustration on the part of the buyers, is they can't find sellers to talk to who are able to help them make progress toward making their decision. And if you can be that seller, that human seller that shows up and says, look, I'm here to help you. And I've got an agenda. My agenda is, if I help you, I win, right? If you win, I win. Buyers are comfortable with that. But unfortunately, most sellers show up and it's all about, I need to win. It doesn't have to do with them at all. And so that's part of how you build the trust part. You connect. Part I try to tell sellers all the time is to keep in mind is that buyers are never under any illusion as to why you're there. So even when you say, look, I'm here and I know I only win if you win. Sure, they'll accept that as the case, but they also know that you're there to do business. So you can't run from that. So lean into it. Help them. That's what they want from you. Help. They don't need you to sell to them. They know you're there to sell. Help them get their job done. And I think sellers, again, sort of confuse this whole process because I think that, when they talk about value in sales, they're talking about the value of their solution to the business. Important that the buyer understand that. But the buyer's making their decision based on the value that they get, and you're helping them to make that decision. Two different things.
The way you phrased it too earlier, that not only helping them to make that decision, but what the buyer is really engaging in is an evaluation and thought process about making a change to their life to some degree. I mean, and so as a seller, you're earning that trust because if they make a decision to put their dollar bills in their pocket, in your pocket, in exchange of currency, they're going to make some changes to their lives. And that's what they're looking at you for, is like, is this somebody that I want to take this journey with? Like, do I want to impact my life this way? And I think, Andy, that's such a great call that I think sellers forget that this is not just value to you and your organization. The buyer is thinking of doing something with their life and like asking you for some level of knowledge or expertise that might help them.
Oh, and they're projecting onto your company the way it's going to be to work with your company based on the way it is to work with you. Right? How else do they know your company? They don't. You are the company. So you get back all the way. We talk about, connection, importance. Think about the importance of first impressions. And it's taken so lightly by so many sellers. It's like, why? If you don't make a good, strong first impression, you may not know it, but you may stay in the game even. You may think you're in the game. They may not dismiss you, but you have no realistic chance of winning because they put you in this certain category. And And what the science of perception, and this has been studied, and I wrote about this in my second book, Amp Up Your Sales.
One of the three
is that people go through this process called precognitive processing, where we make up our minds about people before we're even aware we're doing it. And it takes place within, scientists say, about 250 milliseconds. So time it takes you to blink your eye. And what the science finds is that once we've made up formed this perception of somebody, it's extremely sticky and it's hard to change. Even when we're given evidence to directly contradicts the perception, people are loath to give up the perception they formed of people. And an example I like to give is, if you wake up one morning at 6 o'clock in the morning because there's sirens on your street, and you look outside and you see police and SWAT and so on storming your neighbor's home and walking out your neighbor in handcuffs. And then 24 hours later, they say, wow, complete mistake of identity. This is not person, nothing at all to do with anything. What's everybody still think about their neighbor? Shifty, shady, a criminal, whatever, right? The person's completely innocent. But this is the way the mind works. And so when you're showing up and talking to your buyers and you're casual, right? Way too casual with them. The one that drives me nuts is, you know nothing about them. You made no effort to do any sort of research about them. And then you start showing up and calling them buddy and guy and pal. And, and it's like, they just shut down. They shut down. Doesn't mean they won't ever talk to you again, but you're suddenly in a different category of vendor that they're talking to. And these little things make a difference. And as I like to remind people, there are no such thing as small things in sales, and the buyer never forgets.
I do think it's the little things. And, I think the more that we accept kind of the way the human brain works, to your point, Andy, is like, it doesn't matter how you want to rationalize it. It doesn't matter how you want to try to think that it doesn't matter. First impressions matter. And people almost think that, like, well, the first impression matters of me, but they'll like me after so much that they'll change it. And even if that person wants to change it, the fact you're missing is that that's not how the human brain works. We can make choices, but we are subject to the limitations of what our biology says. And if my impression of you means something, it's going to mean something.
And the part that's frustrating for me, I imagine others as well, because there's sort of voices that sort of try to counter this, is just, as a seller, keep this in mind. Everything you do is a choice. So why wouldn't you make the choice to do the things that put you in the best possible light or create the most favorable conditions for you to be able to build the connection, the credibility, and the trust with the buyer? Cost you nothing. Yeah. 30 seconds on LinkedIn. Spend 30 seconds on LinkedIn. I mean, I was joking with somebody. I was on a podcast yesterday. I was making this joke about, I got 3 emails from this one guy reaching out. He said he was a business owner, but the line was in the email yesterday. It's just, I just laughed. He said, yeah, I know I'm sort of annoying you. This is my 3rd mail, but I just want to let you know we're still doing a great job helping restaurants like yours. And it's just like, well, okay. I understand there's a certain amount of automation involved here, and you're pulling from lists and so on, but it's those things that make a huge difference.
I think andypaul.com is a good name for a restaurant. That's a good name for a restaurant. The analogy that I have here, Andy, that actually fits really perfectly is back in my days of law enforcement. In the beginning, becoming a police officer in most states is very multi-stepped. You have initial testing, physical fitness, et cetera. Then you move on to interviews, blah, 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 blah. But the fail rate of the initial day one you show up, you have to take a written test, and then you got to take a physical agility test, which is usually push-ups, sit-ups, and a run, okay? That's day one. So you typically have a couple hundred people show up. You wouldn't believe, and I think the statistics are about 50% of people would fail that run. And every law enforcement high ranking individual always say, I don't get it. Like there's so many parts of this process you can't
Right.
control. You can't control what the lieutenant or captain
Right.
or chief are going to think about you. You can't control the polygraph. You can't control the psychological. But what you can control, figure out how to run, do push-ups and sit-ups before you show up that day.
I know. Well,
right?
But I was just gonna say, to that point, that is the beauty of being in a sales role and to sell for a living, is that really you don't have control over your product, you don't have control over your price, you've got control over everything else. How responsive do you want to be to your buyers and questions they have? I mean, to me, it's something I've always focused on. I want to get back to people quickly. I want to answer the questions they have because I want to be able to enable them to make progress, right? Because if I'm not responding to them, they're not making progress. And this has been something I've done throughout my entire career, to the point where, like I dread being on airplanes because people are going to call while you're on airplanes and you can't answer the call. And it's like, I will say, when I get off the plane, I return calls. I'll say, yeah, I'm sorry it took so long for me to respond. And people are blown away. They said, it's only been 2 hours. Well, I said, yeah, I hold myself to a higher standard. I'm sorry, I was on an airplane, and it's like, wow, they think you're different suddenly. Because, you set the standard. You can set your own standards and then live up to them. And it's so many things that are so easy. Be likable. Is an absolute 100% necessity? No, but why not? Because we know from a human brain perspective, one of the ways we judge people initially is on the warmth, right? So why not? Robert Cialdini wrote this in his book Persuasion, Fall into Persuasion, where he said that research shows that your odds of winning a deal go up working with a customer if they think you like them, right? If the people who want to give you money think that you like them, then
they're going to give you,
they're going to more likely increase your odds. So again, it's not decisive necessarily or definitive, but it's just one of those factors. Why not lean into these factors that make it so easy, right? I mean, yeah, again, none of them individually necessarily make the difference, but in aggregate, you are this person that shows up. People sense this is a person. This is different, right? We really like working with Matt. Matt was really helpful to us throughout. Matt was incredibly responsive to the questions we had. Matt gave us a couple of great ideas that we hadn't really thought about before. Not that anybody else could not have done that. It's just the way you did it helped them and resonated.
Well, I think it's easy too I think it's easier to have that motivation to do it when you look at it like you're talking about, Andy, which is in that role to try to help them and make progress in their life. So when you get off that plane, it's not a chore, right? Because you're doing it because you genuinely care about that person and you want to help them to make progress. So if that were the case, yeah, you would want to be available more, right? Not because your boss says or because you're shooting for, a 7-figure year or whatever, but like you're doing it because you actually care about them. And when you actually care about people, it makes it a lot easier to do extra things for them.
Yeah,
I feel like.
And I always put it in a different context, an additional context, not different, but an additional context. I was in junior high school. I was, competitive runner, cross country track, and so on. And I just remember we had a very gruff cross country coach. I think he'd been a football coach and got fired from being the football coach. So they gave him the cross country team. But we actually were pretty good. He did a good job. But one of the things he would always make sure he reminded is, says, you guys weren't working very hard today. And he said, so when you're sort of sitting around, think about what was the team from, in our case, West High School doing? What was the guys at West doing while you were lazing around? Right? We've heard this thing. Yeah, what's your competitor doing when you're sleeping? Blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you think about that is if I'm not calling them back and they're expecting an answer and my competitor is, that's going to be problematic for me. So I had control over that. So why wouldn't I want to be as responsive as I could be? And for me, responsiveness is not just the act of calling back. It's calling back with the information they needed, the answers to the questions.
Not calling him bro. What's up,
Oh
bro?
gosh, I wrote about that a few years ago on
Yeah.
LinkedIn, and you'd be surprised the amount of pushback I got on that.
Mm.
I mean, it's one of the most viral posts I've ever had on LinkedIn, because people are like, what are you talking about? This is what I do. This is me. And it's like, I don't care if it's you. It drives people nuts. This over familiarity with somebody, call them by their name instead. That's easy.
The one the one other analogy I really like here, Andy, is that it's amazing, to your point, how we miss out on such little opportunities to make an impact, like showing that we
Hmm?
care, like showing up on time, like not dressing super casual. We won't get too much into it, but also in a previous life for 9 years, I was actually a dating coach for men, and that was around my mental
Right.
health time and all that. And so the rules, right? Here's the deal. Buy a flower, hold the door open, right? Like, what if you have a choice to do something that is going to increase odds of making somebody like you, whether that's in sales or romance or friendship? It's not an extra effort. It's not an extra effort to show up 5 minutes early for something, and not an extra effort to be a likable
Hmm?
person, not an extra effort to ask genuine questions. So I'm sure you've seen this a lot, which is just like, why are we, I want to know from you, why do you think people are not doing these simple
You're not gonna like my
things? Like, they're so
You're not gonna like my answer.
they're so
Yeah.
easy.
Well, I mean,
I
I'm laughing because I've been asked this question before, and I have the same answer. It's a little flip, but not really. And
want to hear it.
bad parenting.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was very fortunate. My parents, I used to hate it when, like, my parents would dress us up and sort of show us off, right? Me and three siblings, right there, show us off, and they take us to, they were throwing a party, and we had to dress up and be out there and talk to adults and so on. I didn't really get it till later. And I can't remember, my parents explained it to me or whatever. But what they're doing is saying, look, we were trying to teach you how to talk with people, right? We're trying to teach you how to feel comfortable talking with adults, comfortable talking with people where there's this, they didn't use this term, but I applied to it, status mismatch, right? Because this is something we run into all the time in sales. We run into it in life, right? You meet people that are a different level or so on, and how do you show up and be comfortable with that? Instead, because most salespeople, I'm meeting with the CEO, I'm all nervous. It's like, well, no, there's a person. They've got certain things they're trying to accomplish in their life. They've got troubles at home. They're just like a human being, just like everybody else.
Yep.
And so I felt very fortunate, that my parents, intentionally or not, put us in these positions where, when I graduated college, I felt comfortable talking to CEOs and other people because I wasn't cowed by the status mismatch. And so, and they taught us the importance of a firm handshake and looking people in the eye and asking questions. That's the thing that they were stressed is, ask somebody a question. And if you want to make yourself interesting to someone else, the best way to do that is be interested in them. So as a seller, you want to turn people off? Yeah, show up, don't be interested, don't prepare, don't do anything. But if you want to start building that connection, show up and be interested in them. This idea of just, spend 30 seconds on your LinkedIn profile. Maybe I find something interesting that might be something I can bring up that, we can both relate to, a little common ground. We don't have to spend 10, 15, 20 minutes on it. Just, showing that I cared. I can't believe, I really can't recall the number of times people have responded to me. We've had conversations, whether it's online or in person, is just, wow, you did your homework. Right? You did your homework. They appreciate that.
Because so few people do it, that when somebody does it, it becomes a really big deal to them.
It takes no time whatsoever. So it's just, again, operating with intent. Back to your question is we do a disservice to sellers, is that, and this is not a comment about, negative about it, generational differences.
Yeah.
But younger people coming into the workforce grew up differently than I did, right? I grew up on the phone, right? That was my generation. We didn't have anything else. We had the phone, or we snuck out the back door and went and visited our friends. There was, obviously no messaging, no nothing. So everything we did pretty much was fully synchronous. We had to engage with people. But now we have a whole generation of people that grew up largely on asynchronous messaging. And it's a different skill set. Now we take them and we throw them on the telephones and go make calls and connect with people. And we don't give them any training to go do that. And it's not like it's hugely difficult, but there are things that people need to learn and practice in order to become proficient at that. Do we train them on that? No. We'll give you sales training. But do we help you learn how to become a little more human in the way to connect with people? Not at all. It's a huge missing opportunity.
And they look at you and they say, so when you say call somebody, you mean text them, right? Is it?
Yeah, but no, they learn very quickly, right? Or you're an SDR or whatever, and you have to make X number of calls. You learn very quickly. And it's tough work. Well, we make it tougher by not equipping people to say, and here's how to really connect with someone in an authentic way when you actually get them on the phone.
Well, before I hear some of your final thoughts here, I just want to share a really valuable lesson that I had learned on this topic. It was one of my first jobs that I had when I was 16 or 17. And, when I was at work, I was really doing a good job. It was at a sandwich sub shop up in Portland, Maine. That's where I'm from. And and so I did a good job when I was there, but I was always habitually 5 to 10 minutes late. And I was trying to, what we talked about earlier about first impressions versus intellectualize it, right? I had a really hard time grasping that. I'm like, wait a minute, you're saying I'm doing a good job when I'm here. Does it matter that I'm 5 minutes late? Does it actually affect the business? And of course it doesn't. But to your point, there are things built into our brain that just irk us or just make us feel really good. Does being 5 minutes late affect anything? No, but it just pisses us off for some reason. So to those same things you talk about, I think with sales, is that, does it really make a difference? Like if I'd spend 3 minutes on your LinkedIn profile? No, but it shows you something. It triggers something in your brain.
Yep.
Is that right?
Yeah, no, it's additive. It's just, again, think about it. You're a salesperson. You're listening to this podcast, and I ask you the question. I said, so on the last deal you won, what was your margin of victory? And people say, well, when I ask questions, a lot of times they go, oh, we were 10% cheap. No. How much did you win by? Right? Not how different was your price. How much did you win by? And the fact is, you don't know really, right? But I think the margins are very thin. Like, if we could grade them, like 1% difference, 2% difference, it's those little things, right? It was just more enjoyable to work with Matt. He respected our time, right? He was always on time, hugely responsive, all things, we talked about before. At the end of the day, they're toting things up. And so this, we can go on just a couple more minutes. You have to think about the way that people actually make decisions. So Herbert Simon, this Nobel Prize winning economist, did a bunch of research on this back in the 50s and 60s. And he developed this theory that he called the theory of bounded rationality. And based on his studies, what he found is that everyone, when you make a decision, you have 3 constraints. You don't have unlimited time. You don't have unlimited access to perfect information. And you have a limited amount of time. You don't never have a perfect understanding of the information that you get, right? So we have these 3 constraints. And what we found is that when people operating within those constraints come to make a decision, they do one pretty logical thing, actually, which is they look until they find a solution that satisfies the requirements and suffices to enable them to achieve their desired outcomes. And he created a new word. He called it satisficing. He conjoined the two. All right.
Satisficing. Okay.
And when people find a solution that satisfies, they make the decision to stop looking. Okay. And the reason they do that is they make the calculation. the marginal gain we'll get from continuing to look for additional solutions that may only be, 1% better doesn't justify the additional investment of our time, our attention, and our resources. This is good enough. This is the classic good enough scenario. We all do it, whether it's in business and personal lives. This is how we make decisions. Now, there's another type of decision maker called the maximizer that will look at every possible option. We'll set that aside for a second. But in the main, people are satisficers. So when we're helping people make progress toward making a decision, and they reach this point, because again, all products and solutions sort of look somewhat the same, right? They find the one that's, oh, yeah, this works. This satisfies our requirements. It suffices to enable us to hit our desired business outcomes. No, actually, we got a couple that are pretty similar. What's the tiebreaker? Matt is the tiebreaker. It's just, you just have to be conscious of how people operate. And my goal always as a seller was, how do I get people to that point of satisficing, right? Once I sort of became familiar with the concept, and I looked back and I said, oh, that's what my customers were doing. This is exactly what they're doing, the way they make their decisions, unless they were like an RFP or something. But most of mine weren't RFPs. And it's like, oh yeah, there's certain things I can do to help my buyer get to the point of satisficing more quickly. Well, I can't help them do that if they don't trust me, if they don't, think that, have the impression of me that, based on working with me, that my company's going to be worthwhile working with, and so on.
In a world that is often trying to make it so complicated, I am fully in alignment with you, Andy, that it's actually the basics. It's the basics that are going to win the day always. And I think if I know what you're talking about, the maximizer might be the person who drives 45 minutes out of their way to save $1.25 per gallon on gas, right?
They did all the research beforehand to find out that they would drive 45 minutes. That's that person. And the thing is, we have aspects of our life where we are maximizers. If I have to have surgery, right, I may get second, third, or fourth opinion, right?
Sure.
But there are people that routinely do it for everything they do in their lives. And another reason why it's important to understand this construct is that you don't necessarily want to sell to those people, right?
Sure.
You have a choice. Again, choose to win. And part of the choice that you make as a seller is, who am I going to sell to? Just because a lead pops up on your desk and you're an AE and you follow up, you're not obligated to continue to sell them. You have to make a choice. Are they going to be worth your time and attention and resources to pursue? And if they're a maximizer, they're not. And I had a client a decade ago that was a nationwide franchise organization, and the franchises were selling a pretty significant price, $50,000 type home improvement type service, as residential solar actually. And that was one of the criteria. We worked with the CEO of the company and the franchise owner. So we set, is this person a maximizer? Right? If you're talking to a homeowner and they said, and you ask them, who else are they talking to? And they said, well, we've been investigating 10 different solutions. Then we'd use that as a cutoff point and say, yeah, they're not going to be a fit for us.
It's not an issue of the competition. It's just an issue of a personality type that we don't feel would be a good investment of our time.
Yeah, because you just never know when they're going to decide that they've talked to everybody. And so what Simon found in his research is that actually maximizers do make technically better decisions. All right. But at what cost? And what they also found, and Barry Schwartz wrote about this in his book, The Paradox of Choice, is that maximizers are your unhappiest customers. And the reason being, they think there's something they missed. They think there's something better out there that they should have seen. And so they have buyer's remorse as soon as they sign with you. And nothing can ever be right, because they're still searching and they're finding and they're comparing you against things they're looking at. So yeah, to be avoided.
Well, to wrap us up here, sir, we talked about this in the beginning a little bit, but I'd like for you to take a minute or two and expand upon hearing a little bit more about the Win Rate
Sure.
podcast. For those of you who don't know, the book Sell Without Selling Out, and then of course AndyPaul.com. So I want to hear. This is a shameless plug for all things related to Andy Paul. The host is asking you,
Nice.
so
Yeah.
all your humility remains
Wow.
intact.
Yeah, that's very nice. Well, thank you.
Yes, sir.
We start with the book Sell Without Selling Out. Yeah, it's been a very popular book, and I think part is because I give people the permission to be themselves in sales, and it really starts with ideas that I don't want you to be like every other person. I want you to be like yourself, and I draw the distinction between you can sell one of two ways. You can sell out, which is the traditional salesy way of selling, pushing, persuasion driven, or you can sell in, which is, as we've talked about, how do we help the buyer make progress toward making a decision? That's our job. Our job is to listen to the buyer, to understand things that are most important to them, and then help them get that. Help being the operative word. So it's, this idea of how do you create buying experiences that resonate with the buyer, that differentiate you from your competition. So please pick up the book. Win Rate podcast. Yeah, right now it's a weekly show. We're going to go to 2 times a week here, I think, pretty soon. A little different format of show. It's me and 3 guests, typically 3 guests. Occasionally there's 2, but mostly 3 guests. We're having roundtable discussion about topics related to sales effectiveness, the buyer experiencing, and increasing your win rates. I'm a huge believer that win rate is the single most important metric for the individual seller. This is, after all, your win rate reflects the buyer's vote on the quality and value of their experience with you. So low win rates means poor experience. High win rates meaning you're adding value, helping them make their decision. You're helping them make their decision. So Win Rate podcast, we talk all about that.
How many people are on that podcast?
Well, me and 3 others typically. So it's fun. It's different. I did 1,200 episodes of previous podcast, interview format. It's fun to be able to do this and get more voices into the discussion in sales, which is what we need. We need more voices. So I might want to check out. I've got a cohort-based coaching program called Buyer Experience Bootcamp, and this is a 5-week program. We meet 3 times a week. One's a workshop, one's a coaching session, one's a Ask Andy Anything question session about using the tools that I wrote about in Sell Without Selling Out, your connection, your curiosity, your understanding, your generosity, again, to create these differentiated buying experiences which increase your win rates. And students have come through, have had, I think, pretty good success in increasing their win rates as a result of doing this, because you're just learning how to show up differently for your buyers and help them navigate what is a complex process for them differently. And then, that covers a lot of it right now.
Well, so it looks like too, and I didn't want to interrupt Andy, but I actually happen to know 3 people who have read his book, Sell Without Selling Out, who all said that these are people who actually tend to be pretty analytical, not overly impressed by a lot, we'll say. And they thought that Andy's book was actually extremely insightful, not just well written, but also, I haven't read it yet, but I know 3 people who have spoken very highly of it. And so I committed to myself after this podcast, I am going to read it. And it looks like too, the Buyer Experience Bootcamp, which is on your LinkedIn page, looks like September 12th through October 13th. This next class, is that correct?
Yes, through the 13th. And it's a good investment to make. I mean, it's, again, the people who have gone through it have experienced this uplift, and it's people from 20-year vets that's selling for Google Cloud and Amazon to even some people a little bit newer in their career. So we had a range of people, and it's great because we get students sharing with each other, and that's adds a lot of value to the experience.
Well, I don't. Are we back? There we go. Yeah, well, I don't think it's a stretch after watching this podcast for anybody to believe that a boot camp with you is going to do anything but be pretty phenomenal for their career. So, Andy and I had met in a first call a couple of months ago. I was impressed then, but in full sincerity, Andy, this is one of my favorite podcasts that I've ever had. You are absolutely amazing.
Thank you.
I genuinely appreciate your time. Do you have any thoughts to close us out here?
No, maybe invite me back. We'll talk about negotiation because we didn't get a chance to talk about that at all. And I've got a lot of thoughts about negotiation that align with what I talk about in the books. But yeah, no, it's been fun, and thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Yeah, with a guy with your wealth of knowledge, we're going to take this wherever it goes. So yes, we'll have to do a round 2 about negotiation. So with that, sir, thank you so much. Thank you to all of our listeners. And again, this is Andy Paul. You can find him on LinkedIn, andypaul.com. His book, Sell Without Selling Out, and then the Win Rate podcast, and also Buyer Experience Bootcamp. He's got a couple things going on. September 12th through October 13th. So Andy, thank you again.